Picture this, it's the year 2300 BCE. Humanity has already figured out farming, beer, and arguing with neighbors, but then someone has a wild idea. What if we don't just run a city, but all the cities? And also the neighbors' land, and their neighbors' land too. Congratulations, you've just invented the empire. Empires are like the original mega-corporations of history. They started small, just villages, hugging rivers, and grew into massive machines swallowing cultures, languages, and armies. From the Akkadians of Mesopotamia, who historians call the first real empire around 2334 BCE, to the Neo-Babylonians, who left us the legend of the Hanging Gardens, these early superpowers shaped the world we live in today. And trust me, their stories are anything but boring. We're talking ruthless kings like Sargon of Akkad, endless battles, gods and myths, and treaties written on clay. So grab your seat, because on Infinitia Verity we're breaking down the first 10 empires in world history. It's like binge-watching the OG season of Game of Thrones, except this stuff actually happened. Hit subscribe and ring the bell, so you don't miss the rise and the spectacular falls of humanity's very first superstates. Before empires, the world was like a patchwork quilt. Hundreds of little kingdoms, city-states and tribes, all doing their own thing. Imagine a giant schoolyard. Every kid has their own lunchbox, and they're constantly stealing snacks from each other. So what was going on? Around 3000 BCE, the first big civilizations were rising. In Mesopotamia, that's modern Iraq and Syria, cities like Uruk, Ur and Lagash were booming. They had farming, writing, temples and armies, but each city was basically its own little country. Constant rivalries, constant wars. Think Game of Thrones, but with more goats. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Nile was the superstar. Around 3100 BCE, King Narmer united Upper and Lower Egypt, creating one of the earliest centralized states. But Egypt was more of a kingdom than an empire, since it mostly ruled Egyptians. In India's Indus Valley, cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were thriving with amazing plumbing systems. In China, the early dynasties were starting to form, and don't forget Anatolia and the Levant, where smaller kingdoms and trading hubs were bubbling. The world was crowded, messy, and everyone wanted more land. And here's the catch. Ruling your own people was hard enough, but the moment you conquered a neighbor who spoke another language, worshipped different gods, and didn't like your bossy attitude, that's when you crossed into empire territory. And that's why around 2334 BCE, when Sargon of Akkad smashed the Sumerian city-states and said, "You're all mine now," historians call it the first true empire. Stick around, because in the next part we'll dive into how these empires rose and why they usually collapsed faster than my New Year's resolutions. Okay, now it's time to binge-watch the real first season of human empire building. 10 empires, one after the other, each trying to be the biggest boss on the block. Let's roll. 1. Akkadian Empire, c. 2334, 2154 BCE. This is where it all starts. Meet Sargon of Akkad, a man whose origin story sounds like a mashup of Moses and Batman. Legend says he was found floating in a basket on a river. He grows up, builds an army, and boom, conquers the Sumerian city-states of Mesopotamia. Why is this important? Because before Sargon, cities fought each other like rival football clubs. After Sargon, one king ruled everyone: Akkadians, Sumerians, and more. He stretched his empire from the Persian Gulf up to the Mediterranean. That's like going from Texas to New York, but with no highways and lots of angry neighbors. The Akkadian Empire gave us the first idea of imperial administration: governors, taxation, even an official language, Akkadian. Sadly, after about 150 years, invasions, droughts, and rebellions ripped it apart. The world's first empire also became the world's first cautionary tale. 2. Neo-Sumerian Empire, Ur-Threed, c. 2112-2004 BCE. After Akkad collapsed, the Sumerians made a comeback, the Ur-Threed dynasty, led by kings like Ur-Nammu and Shulgi. They were masters of paperwork. Seriously, their empire ran on clay tablets, tax records, labor rosters, rations. Ur-Nammu even wrote one of the world's earliest known law codes, beating Hammurabi by a few centuries. The Ur-3 Empire centralized power and tried to keep order, but eventually invasions from the Elamites and Amorites cracked it open. Still, it showed the world that you could rebuild empire from chaos, at least for a while. 3. Old Babylonian Empire, c. 1894-1595 BCE. Next up, Babylon steps into the spotlight. King Hammurabi, 1792–1750 BCE, is the rock star here. His empire unified Mesopotamia again, but what he's really famous for is the Code of Hammurabi, nearly 300 laws carved into stone. This is the guy who basically said, if you poke out someone's eye, they get to poke out yours. Fair's fair. Harsh, yes, but it set a precedent. The state, not personal revenge, should enforce justice. Babylon's empire eventually fell to the Hittites, but the name Babylon stuck around as a symbol of wealth, science, and later biblical legends. 4. Hittite Empire, c. 1600–1178 BCE. Speaking of Hittites, these Anatolian power players were masters of iron and chariot warfare. They controlled central Turkey and pushed into Syria. Their biggest flex, the Battle of Kadesh, 1274 BCE, against Egypt. This was one of the largest chariot battles ever fought, thousands of chariots, rumbling like ancient tanks. The fight was basically a draw, but instead of endless war, the Hittites and Egyptians did something new. They signed the world's first known peace treaty. Eventually, the Hittite Empire collapsed during the mysterious Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE, a mix of invasions, climate change, and general chaos. 5. Mitanni Empire, c. 1500–1300 BCE. Now we meet a lesser-known but very cool empire, the Mitanni. Based in northern Mesopotamia and Syria, the Mitanni were Hurrians who became famous for their horse training. If you wanted the best war chariots, you called Mitanni experts. They were squeezed between Egypt, Hittites, and Assyria, constantly playing balance of power games. At their height, they ruled a wide region, with different cultures and cities under their control. Eventually, though, the Assyrians muscled them out. But their legacy elite chariot warfare lived on. 6. Egyptian New Kingdom, c. 1550–1070 BCE. Egypt had been powerful before, but during the New Kingdom it went full empire mode. Pharaohs like Thutmose III expanded Egypt's reach into Nubia and deep into the Levant. Ramses II fought the Hittites at Kadesh, built colossal temples, and probably had more statues of himself than Instagram selfies. The New Kingdom turned Egypt into an international superpower, rich, powerful, and diplomatically connected. But over time, invasions, internal struggles, and economic troubles weakened it, and Egypt slid back into being just a strong kingdom rather than an empire. 7. Assyrian Empire, c. 900 and 11609 BCE. Here come the Assyrians, history's tough guys. They built what many historians call the First World Empire in terms of sheer scale. With capitals like Nineveh, the Assyrians invented terror as a political tool. They deported whole populations, crushed rebellions brutally, and displayed their power through giant palaces and lion hunt reliefs. Their empire stretched from Egypt to Iran, making them the uncontested rulers of the Near East. But when you rule by fear, eventually everyone gangs up against you. In 612 BCE, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes destroyed Nineveh. The once invincible empire was gone. 8. Neo-Babylonian Empire, 626–539 BCE. Babylon wasn't done yet. Under Nebuchadnezzar II, the city became legendary walls so thick you could race chariots on top. And the fabled Hanging Gardens, whether they actually existed, is still debated. This empire conquered Judah, destroyed Jerusalem's temple in 586 BCE, and exiled much of the Jewish population, an event that shaped biblical history. But Babylon's glory days didn't last. In 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia walked in and took over almost without a fight. Babylon had become just another jewel in someone else's crown. 9. Persian Achaemenid Empire, c. 550–330 BCE. Now we step into true world empire territory, the Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great. This was the largest empire the world had ever seen, up to that point stretching from India to Greece, from Egypt to Central Asia. What made Persia different? Instead of ruling through terror, Cyrus and Darius the Great built their empire on tolerance and smart administration. Local religions were respected, roads and postal systems connected the realm, and governors, satraps, kept order. This empire was multicultural, multi-ethnic, and it worked for about 200 years. Then a guy named Alexander the Great showed up, but that's another story. 10. Tie in. Why it matters so, from Sargon's Akkad to Cyrus's Persia, the first 10 empires were like humanity's trial runs at ruling the world. Some relied on fear, others on paperwork, others on diplomacy. Most collapsed in spectacular fashion, but each one left behind lessons, innovations, and stories that shaped how later empires Rome, China, the Ottomans, the British would rise. And that, folks, is your crash course on the world's first 10 empires. 10 giants of history rising, ruling, and crashing, all before 300 BCE. Honestly, they made the blueprint for empire that leaders are still copying and messing up today. If you enjoyed this epic ride through ancient power struggles, smash that like, drop a comment with your favorite ancient empire, and hit subscribe to Infinitia Verity, because next time we'll dive into how empires didn't just rule, they rewired the entire map of civilization. So what happened after our lineup of the world's first 10 empires? Well, in a way, nothing new and everything new. The Persian Achaemenids handed the torch to Alexander the Great, who built an empire that sprinted across 3 continents, only to collapse within a generation. Rome, centuries later, would pick up the playbook of the Persians and Assyrians. In China, the Qin and Han dynasties forged empires that mirrored the same themes: central control, infrastructure, taxation, cultural identity. The pattern kept repeating: rise, glory, decline. But every empire left behind something: law codes, trade routes, myths, religions, architecture. It wasn't just about who ruled, it was about the systems they built that outlived them. In a strange way, we're all still living in the shadow of these ancient experiments. Our ideas of government, borders, and even diplomacy trace their roots to Akkad, Babylon, and Persia. Empires fall, but their DNA stays in the world we live in. And there you have it, the world's first 10 empires, from Sargon's Akkad to Cyrus's Persia. Together, they built the foundation stones of human civilization: law, diplomacy, administration, warfare, and cultural exchange. Sure, their walls crumbled, their statues fell, their kings were forgotten, but their lessons still echo. Empires are more than conquests. They're humanity's laboratories for power, ambition, and imagination. So next time you see the ruins of a ziggurat, a pyramid, or a palace, remember, these weren't just rocks. They were the first blueprints for ruling the world. This is Infinitia Verity, where history speaks and we listen.